Chapter 12 of Uller Uprising. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Acacia Wood. Uller Uprising by H. Beam Piper. Chapter 12. The Shadow of Niflheim. The sun slid lower and lower toward the horizon behind them as the aircar bulleted south along the broad valley and dry bed of the Hork River, nearing the zone of equal day and night. Hassan Bogdanov drove while Harry Quong finished his lunch, then changed places to begin his own. Von Schlichten got 2 bottles of beer from the refrigerated section of the lunch hamper and opened one for Paula Quinton and one for himself. "What are we going to do with these geeks?" She was using the nasty and derogatory word unconsciously and by custom now, after this is all over. We can't just tell them, "Jolly well played, nice game, wasn't it?" and go back to where we were Wednesday evening. No, we can't. There's going to have to be a tear and seizure of political power in every part of this planet that we occupy, and as soon as we're consolidated around and north of Takkad Sea, we're going to have to move in elsewhere, he replied. Keegark, Konkrook, and the Free Cities, of course, will be relatively easy. They're in arms against us now, and we can take them over by force. We had to make that deal with Jonkvank, or rather, I did, so that will be a slower process, but we'll get it done in time. If I know that pair as well as I think I do, Jonkvank and Yoorkerk will give us plenty of pretexts before long. Then we can start giving them government by law instead of by royal decree, and real courts of justice, put an end to the head payment system, and to these arbitrary mass arrests and tax delinquency imprisonments that are nothing but slave raids by the geek princes on their own people, and gradually abolish serfdom. In a couple of centuries, this planet will be fit to admit to the Federation, like Odin and Freya. Well, won't that depend a lot on whom the company sends here to take Harrington's place? Unless I'm much mistaken, the company will confirm me, he replied. Administration on Uller is going to be a military matter for a long time to come, and even the banking cartel and the mercantile interests in the company are going to realize that, and see the necessity for taking political control. The Federation government owns a bigger interest in the company than the public realizes, too. They've always favored it. And just to make sure, I'm sending Hidaliri to Terra on the next ship to make a full report on the situation. You think it'll be cleared up by then? The city of Montevideo is due in from Niflheim in a little under 3 months. It'll have to be cleared up by then. We can't keep this war going more than a month at the present rate. Police action and mopping up, yes. Full-scale war? No. Ammunition? She asked. He looked at her in pleased surprise. Your education has been progressing at that, he said. You know, a lot of professional officers, even up to field rank in the combat branches, seem to think that ammo comes down miraculously from heaven in contragravity lorries every time they pray into a radio for it. It doesn't. It has to be produced as fast as it's expended, and we haven't been doing that. So we'll have to lick these geeks before it runs out, because we can't lick them with gun butts and bayonets. Well, how about nuclear weapons? Paula asked. I hate to suggest it. I know what they did on Mimir and Fenris and Midgard, and what they did on Terra during the 1st century, but it may be our only chance. He finished his beer and shoved the bottle into the waste receiver, then got out his cigarettes. I'd hate to have to make a decision like that, Paula, he told her. The military use of nuclear energy is the next to last thing I'd want to see on Uller. Fortunately, or unfortunately, it's a decision I won't have to make. There isn't a single nuclear bomb on the planet. The companies always refuse to allow them to be manufactured or stockpiled here. I don't think there'd be any criticism of your making them now, General. And there's plenty of plutonium. You can make A-bombs, at least. There isn't anybody here who even knows how to make one. Most of our nuclear engineers could work one up in about 3 months, when we'd either not need one or not be alive. Dr. Gomes, who came in on the Pretoria 2 weeks ago, can make 'em, she contradicted. He built at least a dozen of them on Niflheim to use in activating volcanoes and bringing ore-bearing lava to the surface. Von Schlichten's hand, bringing his lighter to the tip of his cigarette, paused for a second. Then he completed the operation, snapped it shut, and put it away. When did all this happen? She took time out for mental arithmetic. Even a spaceship officer had to do that when a question of interstellar time relations arose. About 350 days ago, Galactic Standard. They'd put off the first shot, 6 bombs, before I got in from Terra. I saw the second shot a day or so before I left Niflheim on the Canberra. Dr. Gomes had to stay over till the Pretoria to put off the third shot. Why? Did you run into a geek named Gorkrink while you were in Nif?" he asked her. "And what sort of work was he doing?" "Gorkrink? I don't seem to remember oh, yes! He was helping Dr. Marilla, the seismologist. His year was up after that second shot. He came to Uller on the Canberra. Dr. Marilla was sorry to lose him. He understood Lingua Terra perfectly. Dr. Marilla could talk to him the way you do with Kankad, without using a geek speaker." "Well, but what sort of work?" "Helping set and fire the A-bombs." "Oh, good Lord!" "You can say that again, and dealing Allah, Shiva, and Kali," von Schlichten told her. "Especially Kali. Harry, see if you can get some more speed out of this can. I want to get to Konkrook while it's still there." It was full dark when Konkrook came in view beyond the East Konk Mountains, a lurid smear on the underside of the clouds, and, at Gongonk Island and at the company farms to the south, a couple of bunches of searchlights fingering about in the sky. When von Schlichten turned on the outside sound pickup, he could hear the distant tom-tomming of heavy guns and the crash of shells and bombs. Keeping the car high enough to be above the trajectories of incoming shells, Harry Quong circled over the city while Hassan Bogdanov talked to Gongonk Island on the radio. The city was in a bad way. There were 75 to 100 big fires going, and a new one started in a rising ball of thermoconcentrate flame while they watched. The 3 gun cutters, Elmoran, Gaucho, and Bushranger, and about 50 big freight lorries converted to bombers were shuttling back and forth between the island and the city. The Royal Palace was on fire from end to end, and the entire waterfront and industrial district were in flames. Combat cars and air jeeps were driving into shell and rocket and machine gun streets and buildings. He saw 6 big bomber lorries move in dignified procession to unload, one after the other, on a row of buildings along what the Terrans called South 10th Street, and on the roofs of buildings a block away, red and blue flares were burning, and he could see figures, both human and Ulleran, setting up mortars and machine guns. Landing on the top stage of Company House on the island, they were met by a Terran whom von Schlichten had seen, a few days ago, bossing native labor at the spaceport, but who was now wearing a major's insignia. He greeted von Schlichten with a salute, which he must have learned from some movie about the ancient French Foreign Legion. Von Schlichten seriously returned it in kind. "Everybody's down in the Governor-General's office, sir," he said. "Your office, that is. King Kankad's here with us, too." He accompanied them to the elevator, then turned to a telephone. When von Schlichten and Paula reached the office, everybody was crowded at the door to greet them. Themistocles Mzangwe, his arm in a sling, Hans Meyerstein, the Johannesburg lawyer, who seemed to have even more Bantu blood than the Brigadier General, Morton Berman, the commercial superintendent, Laviola, the fiscal secretary, a dozen or so other officers and civil administrators. There was a hubbub of greetings, and he was pleased to detect as much real warmth from the civil administration crowd as from the officers. "Well, I'm glad to be back with you," he replied generally, "and let me present Colonel Paula Quinton, my new adjutant, Hid O'Leary on duty in the north. Thumb, this was a perfectly splendid piece of work here. You can take this not only as a personal congratulation, but as a sort of unit citation for the whole crowd. You've all behaved simply above praise." He turned to King Kankad, who was wearing a pair of automatics and shoulder holsters for his upper hands, and another pair and cross-body belt holsters for his lower. "And what I've said for anybody else goes double for you, Kankad," he added, clapping the Kragan on the shoulder. "All he did was save the lot of us," Mzangwe said. "We were hanging on by our fingernails here till his people started coming in. And then, after you sent the Aldebaran... Where is the Aldebaran, by the way? I didn't see her when I came in." "Based on Kankad's, flying bombardment against Keegark, and keeping an eye out for those ships. Prinsloo caught the Devet in the docks there and smashed her, but the Jan Smuts got away, and we haven't been able to locate the Paul Kruger either. They're probably both on the eastern shore, gathering up reinforcements for Orzguild," Mzangwe said. "Our ability to move troops rapidly is what's kept us on top this long, and Orgzild's had plenty of time to realize it," von Schlichten said. "When we got Procyon down here, I'm going to send her out, with a screen of light scout vehicles, to find those ships and get rid of them. How's Hid been making out at Grank, by the way? I didn't have my car radio on coming down." That touched off another hubbub. "Haven't you heard, General? Oh, my God, this is simply out of this continuum. Well, tell him, somebody. No, get Hid on the screen. It's his story." Somebody busied himself at the switchboard. The rest of them sat down at the long conference table, Laviola and Meyerstein and Berman, obsequious in seating von Schlichten in Sid Harrington's old chair, and in getting a chair for Paula Quinton. After a while, the jumbled colors on the big screen resolved themselves into an image of Hideyoshi O'Leary, grinning like a pussycat beside an empty goldfish bowl. "Well, what happened?" von Schlichten asked, after they had exchanged greetings. "How do Yoorkerk like the movies? And did you get the Procyon and the Northern Lights loose?" "Yoorkerk was deeply impressed," O'Leary replied. "His story is that he is, and always was, the true and ever-loving friend of the company. He acted to prevent, quote, certain disloyal elements, unquote, from harming the people and property of the company. Procyon's on the way to Konkrook. I'm holding Northern Lights here and Northern Star at Skilk. Where do you want them sent?" "Leave Northern Star at Skilk for the time being. Tell the company's great and good friend, King Yoorkerk, that the company expects him to contribute some soldiers for the campaign here and against Keegark, when that starts. Be sure you get the best armed and best trained regiments he has, and get them down here as soon as possible. Don't send any of your Kragans or Karamessian's troops here, though. Hold them in Grank till we make sure of the high quality of Yoorkerk's friendship." "Well, General, I think we can be pretty sure now. You see, he turned Rakkeed the Prophet over to me." "What?" Von Schlichten felt his monocle starting to slip and took a firmer grip on it. "Who?" "Pay me thumb, he didn't drop it," Hideyoshi O'Leary said. "Why, Rakkeed the Prophet. Yoorkerk was holding our ships and our people in case we lost. He was also holding Rakkeed at the palace in case we won. Of course, Rakkeed thought he was an honored guest right up till Yoorkerk's guards dragged him in and turned him over to us." "That geek," von Schlichten said, "is too smart for his own good. Some of these days, he's going to play both ends against the middle, and both ends'll fold in on him and smash him." A suspicion occurred to him. "You sure this is Rakkeed? It would be just like Yoorkerk to try to sell us a ringer." O'Leary shook his head solemnly. "I thought of that right away. This is the real article. Karamessinis constabulary and intelligence officer certified him for me. What do you want me to do? Send him down to Konkrook?" Von Schlichten shook his head. "Get the priests of the locally venerated gods to put him on trial for blasphemy, heresy, impersonating a prophet, practicing witchcraft without a license, or any other ecclesiastical crimes you or they can think of. Then, after he's been given a scrupulously fair trial, have the soldiers of King Yoorkerk behead him, and stick his head up over a big sign, in all native languages, Rakkeed the False Prophet, and have audiovisuals made of the whole business, trial and execution, and be sure that the priests and Yoorkerk's officers are in the foreground, and our people stay out of the pictures." "Soap and towels for General Pontius von Pilate," Paula Quinton called out. "That's an idea. I was wondering what to give Yoorkerk as a testimonial present," Hideyoshi O'Leary said. "A nice 30-piece silver set." "Quite appropriate," von Schlichten approved. "Well, you did a first-class job. I want you back with us as soon as possible. Incidentally, you're now a brigadier general. But not till the situation Skilk is stabilized. And eventually, you'll probably have to set up permanent headquarters in the north." After Hideyoshi O'Leary had thanked him and signed off, the screen was dark again. He turned to the others. "Well, gentlemen, I don't think we need to worry too much about the north for the next few days. How long do you estimate this operation against Konkrook's going to take? To complete pacification, Thumb?" "How complete is complete pacification, General?" Themistocles M'zangwe wanted to know. "If you mean to the end of organized resistance by larger-than-squad-sized groups, I'd say 3 days, give or take 12 hours. Of course, there'll be small groups holding out for a couple of weeks, particularly in the farming country and back in the forest. We can forget them. That's minor tactics stuff. We'll need to keep some kind of an occupation force here for some time. They can deal with that. We'll have to get to work on Keegark as soon as possible. After we've reduced Keegark, we'll be able to reorganize for a campaign against the Free Cities on the eastern shore." "Begging your pardon, General, but reduce is a mild word for what we ought to do to Keegark," Hans Meyerstein said. "We ought to raise that city as flat as a football field, and then play football on it with King Orgzild's head." "Any special reason?" von Schlichten asked. "In addition to the Blount Le Mans massacre, that is." "I should say so, General," Themistocles M'zangwe backed up Meyerstein. "Bob, you tell him." Colonel Robert Grinnell, the intelligence officer, got up and took the cigar out of his mouth. He was short and round-bodied and bald-headed, but he was Old-Terrain Federation Regular Army. "Well, General, we've been finding out quite a bit about the genesis of this business lately," he said. "From up north, it probably looked like an all-Rakkeed show, that's how it was supposed to look. But the whole thing was hatched at Keegark by King Orgzild. We've managed to capture a few prominent Konkrookans, he named half a dozen, who've been made to talk, and a number of others who have come in voluntarily and furnished information. Orgzild conceived the scheme in the beginning. Rakkeed was just the messenger boy. My face gets the color of the company trademark every time I think that the whole thing was planned for over a year, right under our noses, even to the signal that was to touch the whole thing off. The poisoning of Sid Harrington, and our announcement of his death? Von Schlichten asked. You figured that out yourself, sir? Well, that was it. Grinnell went on to elaborate, while von Schlichten tried to keep the impatience out of his face. Beside him, Paula Quinton was fidgeting too. She was thinking, as he was, of what King Orgzild and Prince Gorgrink were doing now. And I know positively that the order for the poisoning of Sid Harrington came from the Keegarkan embassy here, and was passed down through Gurgurk and Keeluk to this geek here who actually put the poison in the whiskey. Yes, I agree that Keegark should be wiped out, and I'd like to have an immediate estimate on the time it'll take to build a nuclear bomb to do the job. One of the old-fashioned plutonium fusion A-bombs will do quite well. Everybody turned quickly. There was a momentary silence, and then Colonel Evan Colbert, of the 4th Kragan Rifles, the senior officer under Themistocles Mazangui, found his voice. If that's an order, General, we'll get it done. But I'd like to remind you first of the company policy on nuclear weapons on this planet. I'm aware of that policy. I'm also aware of the reason for it. We've been compelled, because of the lack of natural fuel on Uller, to set up nuclear power reactors and furnish large quantities of plutonium to the geeks to fuel them. The company doesn't want the natives here learning of the possibility of using nuclear energy for destructive purposes. Well, gentlemen, that's a dead issue. They've learned it, thanks to our people in Niflheim, and unless my estimate is entirely wrong, King Orgzild already has at least one first-century Nagasaki-type plutonium bomb. I am inclined to believe that he had at least one such bomb, probably more, at the time when orders were sent to his embassy here for the poisoning of Governor-General Harrington. With that, he selected a cigarette from his case, offered it to Paula, and snapped his lighter. She had hers lit, and he was puffing on his own, when the others finally realized what he had told them. "That's impossible!" somebody down the table shouted, as though that would make it so. Another, one of the civil administration crowd, almost exactly repeated Jules Cavini's words at Skilk. What the hell was intelligence doing? Sleeping? General von Schlichten, Colonel Grinnell took oblique cognizance of the question you've just made, by implication, a most grave charge against my department. If you're not mistaken in what you've just said, I deserve to be court-martialed. I couldn't bring charges against you, Colonel. If it were a court-martial matter, I'd belong in the dock with you, von Schlichten told him. It seems, though, that a piece of vital information was possessed by those who were unable to evaluate it, and until this afternoon, I was ignorant of its existence. Colonel Quinton, suppose you repeat what you told me on the way down from Skilk. Well, General, don't you think we ought to have Dr. Gomes do that? Paula asked. After all, he constructed those bombs on Niflheim, and it'll be he who'll have to build ours. That's right. He looked around. Where's Dr. Lorenzo Gomes, the nuclear engineer who came in on the Pretoria 2 weeks ago? Send out for him, and get him in here at once. There was another awkward silence. Then Kent Pickering, the chief of the Gongonk Island power plant, cleared his throat. Why, General, didn't you know? Dr. Gomes is dead. He was killed during the first half-hour of the uprising. End of Chapter 12. Recording by Acacia Wood.